Thank you, Christoph, for joining us, and thank you everyone else for joining us here. This is our second philosophy talk at North Park University, sponsored by the Philosophy Department and the Philosophy Club. Our MC today is Isabella Gracias.
Today we're going to have a talk from Christoph Jäger on meta-emotions, the professor of philosophy at the University of Innsbruck in Austria. His area of specialization includes social ethnology, sorry, my English is not that good, philosophy of emotions, philosophy of religion, free will, and moral responsibilities. Amongst the most important psychic mechanism by which we engage and the reflective of self-appraisal and our meta-emotions, emotions that we have about our own emotions. And Christoph today will be discussing the structure of meta-emotions, and I give you the floor so you can continue your presentation.
Right. All right. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me. Can you hear me well? Is that fine? Okay. Great. Thanks so much. No, I'm really happy to share my thoughts on meta emotions with you tonight. My talk is structured in three parts. First, I shall introduce meta emotions, their phenomenology, their intentional structure. As I heard, some of you have read one of my papers on meta emotions, the one I have co-authored with Eva Benninger-Huber, who is a psychologist. I mean, if you studied this paper, you already know quite a bit about my take on higher order or on meta emotions, but I shall nevertheless introduce the basics once more. And then I do have this in this paper, I apply this idea of my account of meta emotions to what I call Frankfurt-style theories of psychic unity. Frankfurt also talks of wholehearted identification of a person with their own self. And the point here is that Frankfurt-style theories, so we're talking about Harry Frankfurt, who just died not so long ago in 2023 or 24, I think. So these theories were very famous. Frankfurt's theories of higher order volitions. So Frankfurt thinks that what accounts for psychic harmony or psychic unity is a matter of a hierarchy of volitions. And so my key point in this discussion about psychic unity, about volitional theories of psychic unity, is that this is actually only gives us a part of the story, and that this has to be complemented by a theory of meta emotions, because what constitutes our self is not just our volitions, but it's our volitions and it's also our affective attitudes. It's of course also our beliefs, but an essential part of what constitutes ourselves are our emotions, our current emotions, and our emotional dispositions, according to my theory. Now, what also matters, if we, if in the tradition of higher order theories of the self, would also be our higher order emotional appraisal or affective assessment of our own first level or lower level emotional conditions. And this is the key idea. And I think that meta emotions are a very interesting psychic phenomena that sort of complement the Frankfurt style picture in this area. Right. Let us start. Section 1, emotions and meta-emotions, the phenomenology and intentional structure. Here are some basics. William James once said that the following. He said, "I am told of a case of morbid terror of which the subject confessed that what possessed her seemed more than anything to be the fear of fear itself." End of quote. This is from James' famous paper, What is an Emotion, from 1884. Now, fearing one's own fear is a famous topic. We've heard it said by Franklin Roosevelt in his inauguration lecture in March 1933. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, says Roosevelt. So obviously, what we have here is an emotion. Fear is an emotion that is directed towards another emotion had by the same subject. And this other emotion in this case is the same kind of the same type. So it's fear about fear that we are talking about here. Here is Masha Kaleko, a poet with a poem from 1966. Chase away the fears and the fear of the fears. For the few years that are left, everything might still suffice. She, I think she immigrated to the US and was a famous poet there. What do we have here? This is the structure of fearing one's own fears. We have a negative meta-emotion that is intentionally directed at a negative first-order emotion, in this case of the same kind, okay? What is important here is that we are talking about intentionality. We are not talking about a causal relation, okay? Even though a first-order emotion such as fear might cause someone to have another fear, second-order fear, if you like, and if even though this causal relation often coincides with an intentional relation between the first order and the second order emotion, this need not be so. And what I'm interested in when I talk about meta-emotion is actually an intentional relation, intentionality in the philosophical sense of being directed at something, right? The cause of a meta-emotion and its intentional object often coincide, but they may come apart. Think of instances where you, I don't know, become angry because someone just stole your parking lot or something like that. Now you are angry at that other person, at that other driver who did something you disapprove of, but what he might not actually be the cause, but the deeper cause might some kind of irritation of anger or frustration that you've gone through just a minute before. Okay. So the causal story might be quite different from the intentional story, so to speak. This is just to make this very clear. Often, of course, the causes and the intentional objects of meta-emotions do coincide. Are there other pairings? Yes, there are other pairings. Here we have negative meta-emotion and a negative first-order emotion. Here we have an example. Tina Charles sang in, when was it, in 1976, I Love to Love. Here we have a positive higher order or meta-emotion directed at a first-order emotion, if that is what she means. And now, interestingly, this appears already in Augustine in 397. So Augustine already anticipated Tina Charles, so to speak. He, in his Confessions, he writes about amare amabam, which means I loved to love. Yeah. So, and actually, Augustine's Confessions are a rich source of examples and reflections, initial reflections on meta-emotions. I think Augustine might have been the first philosopher who really thought about this phenomenon. Although you will not find in the Confessions, I think, any kind of systematic account or taxonomy, not even a taxonomy or a systematization of meta-emotions. Yeah, so what we have now, we had examples of negative and positive pairing. Fearing one's fear, loving one's love. Are there other pairings? Yes, there are. Rihanna sang in 2007, and I hate how much I love you, boy, but I just can't let you go. I hate that I love you so. Here we have, obviously, hate is a negative emotion, love is a positive emotion. All right, I mean, love, some emotion theorists would say that love is not really an emotion, falling in love is, but yeah, let's not be too strict about this. This is just an example. Suppose love is an emotional phenomenon in a broad sense. And once again, Augustine had something to say on love and pain. He says in his Confessions, lacrimae amantur et dolores, tears and pain are loved. Again, this anticipates, yeah, well, no, this is a different kind of pairing. Rihanna has a negative emotion about a positive one, and Augustine looks into a negative emotion that is appraised positively by a positive emotion. Here, love is directed at pain and tears. We find this echoed, for example, in Aquinas, in his Summa Theologiae. Tears that are shed out of sadness can be gratifying, he says. Lacrimae quae ex tristitia oriuntur possunt delectabilis. And he also talks about humans who can love, suffer from suffering, fearing, or who are fearing their own fears. Importantly, when you look into the psychological literature, you will find that the term meta-emotion is used, but in a slightly different sense. There is research on family relations, on family psychology, where the term occurs, but also is used as an umbrella term that covers, which I do not want to cover when I use meta-emotion, namely emotions people have about other people's emotions. Okay, so of course, in a sense, you can call that meta-emotion, but this is not. So I only want to restrict this term just not for any systematic reason, but just for terminological reasons. I want to restrict the term meta-emotion to the intra-subjective case and not to the inter-subjective case. And this is, of course, what Augustine and Aquinas and other people contemplate about. So here is here's something from a famous German novel from 1905. Professor Unrat, well, it's probably something like Professor Garbage, actually. This is would be the translation. Professor Unrat is Professor Garbage by Heinrich Mann. He was compelled to love her and to suffer from his love. To suffer from his love. Rihanna sings, I hate that I love you. Professor Garbage suffers from his love to the girl Rosa Fröhlich, which rebelled against the service of his hatred. All right, so what we have is negative, negative, positive, positive, negative, positive, and positive, negative pairings structurally. Fearing one's feet, loving one's, the examples are pretty clear. And we also have, of course, examples where the first order emotion is of the same type as the higher order emotion, as the meta emotion. But of course, fearing one's fear is an instance. But of course, being ashamed of one's fear would also be a negative pairing. But where the emotions at the emotion at the second level, at the higher order level, is different from the first order level negative emotion. Right. So I think these so I think the phenomenon exists. So I think there is no doubt, and I had all these examples from the literature, from the fine literature. But also from everyday life, we can think of meta emotions. I do not think there is a question that the phenomenon actually exists. I've heard when I gave talks about this, there sometimes it is objected that, well, no, it isn't the first order emotion actually going away? Isn't it altered by necessarily altered by a second order emotion? I cannot see this. I mean, yes, ultimately your meta emotion might alter your first order emotion, but I cannot see that in general, whenever we relate to our first order emotions by a meta emotion, that this automatically, necessarily, for conceptual reasons, alters, or for psychological reasons, alters the first order emotion. So one may discuss or question whether the phenomenon as I have described it actually exists, but we can do this in a discussion in the Q&A, but I'm pretty certain that instances of true meta emotions as I've described them do exist. Yeah, I mean, 19th century literature seems to be particularly rich in characterizing meta emotions. Tolstoy in War and Peace says, in his abomination of everything around him, Pierre felt a kind of irritating pleasure. So there's pleasure about feeling abominated by things. And then there is Victor Hugo in Les Travailleurs de la Mer. He says that la mélancolie, c'est le bonheur d'être triste. So melancholy is the happiness in feeling in feeling down, in feeling sad. Okay, and many more examples could be added to this list. I'm happy if you have other examples that I haven't come across. I'm of course collecting examples from everyday life, from literature, from psychology, from films. Wherever you find them, I'm grateful for more examples. All right. Sometimes the overall emotional situation is more complicated. There's no doubt about this. And here's the classic example from Catullus, the songs, the Carmina from Catullus, very famous. From the 1st century before Christ, He says, I hate and I love. Why do I do this? You may ask, I do not know, but feel that it happens and I am tormented. So again, so here we have hate and love and feeling tormented about hating and loving at the same time. So this is something, this is a situation like this, I guess. So there's a negative higher order or meta emotion directed at the fact that you have two conflicting emotions of the first order, where these are directed at the same object. In this case, it's his loved one, Lesbia. What we could say is that in this case, the primary object or the primary objects in this case of the meta emotion are the first order emotions, and the object of these first order emotions, in this case it's two first order emotions, is the secondary object. In a sense, the object of the first order emotion also becomes the object of the meta emotion. I call it the secondary object of the meta emotion. Right. One question that arises, that tends to arise in this context, is whether there arises an infinite regress. Okay, because of course, if you have a third order emotion about a second order emotion, about a first order emotion, why shouldn't you have a fourth order emotion about the third order emotion, and so forth? An example of a tripartite hierarchy here would be, let's say, feeling happy about one's contempt for one's malicious joy. So the malicious joy, it's malicious joy, but it's joy. It's a first order emotion. It's a positive emotion, hedonically a positive emotion. You may disapprove of your malicious joy for moral reasons, for example. You may feel contempt for your malicious joy, and then somehow feel satisfied or even happy about the fact that you feel contempt for your malicious joy. Right? Other examples are, yeah, let's say you feel ashamed for enjoying your sadness when watching a cheap tearjerker, something like that, right? You have more complex, you have this kind of hierarchy. Now the answer why this account I'm sketching does not end up in an infinite regress is that the claim is not that every emotion necessarily triggers some meta emotion. This is not the claim, right? So we would end up in an infinite regress if the claim were, yeah, every emotion has a meta emotion, but this is not, I'm not saying this, you know, it's not a kind of, the claim is not that there's any kind of psychological or even conceptual necessity that we engage in self-appraisal via meta emotions. That's not the claim. So I think the regress problem is not really a big problem for the account as I want to endorse it. Here's a general definition of meta emotion. This is a bit complicated. It's quite a mouthful, so I'll read it slowly to you. A given agent's meta emotions are their occurrent or dispositional, intentional affective states or episodes at a particular period or point in time, whose objects or the objects of which, probably grammatically better, the objects of which are other occurrent or dispositional affective states or episodes of an intentional or non-intentional kind of that same agent. in which they find themselves at the same or at a different period of time. Okay, explanation. The fact that it's of course what we need is an intentional emotion at the meta level. Okay, affective state is an umbrella term that covers intentional emotions, but also non-intentional affective phenomena. The standard example, a standard example in literature on emotions are moods. Okay, a mood is an affective phenomenon. But feeling melancholic or feeling elated for no special reason, with no special object, just being in that mood is not an intentional affective state. It's not a full-blown intentional emotion. Now, could a mood occur at the meta level? No, because the meta emotion, the higher order thing, right, needs an intentional object. So a mood cannot occur at the higher level. So what we need here is the restriction or the specification that meta emotions are intentional affective states or episodes. Emotions take time. Emotions don't only occur at instances of time. And I also want to be, so this is all meant to be pretty liberal. I also want to include occurrent or dispositional intentional affective states. Yeah, an occurrent emotional state is a state that you feel right now, right? It's there. On reflection, on introspection, you feel that you are in a certain, for example, hot emotional state. You're angry right now. But we can also talk about dispositional intentional states. You may have the disposition to be fearful. You may even have a character trait of being a kind of, I don't know, happy person, that kind of thing. And I think these dispositional higher order emotional states can also be have intentional objects, emotional objects at the first order level. Now I also, why do I say here? Here we talk about the first level, right? The affective state or episode of the first level, the object level. And here I want to allow for non-intentional affective states as well. This is just conventional. I mean, I have no special. So I want to be liberal and say, if you have a mood, if you feel happy about your or if you are ashamed of your melancholic mood, say, or do you disapprove you have fear of your of melancholy, for example, yeah, that could be included in my notion of meta emotions, right? So there can be a mood which is the object of a meta emotion. So non-intentional affective states can occur at the object level, but not at the meta level. That's basically the point of this general definition. So moods cannot be meta emotions, but according to my account, they can constitute objects of meta emotions. Also, maybe other kinds of non-intentional affective phenomena, depending on our theory of emotions. Right. Let's now move on to Frankfurt-style theories of the coherence of the self, or of a person's identification, wholehearted identification with their selves. Frankfurt says in a famous paper from 1987, quote, "It is a salient characteristic of human beings that we care about what we are. We are particularly concerned with our own motives." this is already loading the dice in a way that I think is going in a slightly wrong direction. Anyway, it matters greatly to us whether the desires by which we are moved to act as we do motivate us because we want them to be effective in moving us, or whether they move us regardless of ourselves or even despite ourselves. In the latter case, we are moved to act as we do without wanting wholeheartedly to be motivated as we are. End of quote. So there are motives or desires of the first order, and there are volitions or desires directed at these first order desires. And these higher order desires assess or somehow evaluate our first order desires. They take sides. And if we have conflicting first order desires, we may have second order desires or volitions that somehow tell us, I would rather like to have desire A and not desire B. Actually, there are Frankfurt discusses two kinds of evaluating or assessing one's own desires, to different types. So we can take a stance towards the fact that we have certain desires. Maybe we just don't want to have certain desires, which we in fact find in ourselves to our great dismay, for example. On the other hand, I may be satisfied and maybe okay with having a certain first order desire, but don't want to this desire actually to move me all the way into action. Yeah. So Frankfurt is very has an interesting ideas about this. So you might say, yeah, maybe I want to have the desire of an addict, of a drug addict or whatever, just in order to experience how it feels, how would it feel to be addicted to a certain drug, for example. But being rational, I would not want this desire to drive me to action, to actually take the drug. Okay, so this is a kind of little distinction regarding the higher order volition. So the picture is this: there is a second order volition, and we may have conflicting first order volitions, and the second order volition might actually choose one volition of the first order, which this second order volition wants to become the person's will. So Frankfurt says a first order volition that actually gets me into action, or drives me into action, or would do so if not impeded, is the person's will. So I can have a higher order desire or volition that tells me, yeah, volition number 2 should be your will, but rather not the conflicting desire V1 or V3. Apparently, when you had a desire to, do something else this morning, go for a coffee, go for a run, go for a walk, or go to this lecture, conflicting desires, you could not realize all of them at the same time. You have a higher order volition that tells you, yeah, I better make my volition to go to the lecture. That should be my will. So you did it, and here you are. Okay. Now the complication, the obvious question at this point, of course, is, but what about conflicting second order desires? So nothing guarantees that we have just one coherent second order desire that tells me which first order desires I want to make my will. So there are maybe conflicting second order volitions as well. So here in this case, V1 star chooses V2 at the first order level, but V2 star chooses V1 to be the chosen one, the chosen volition. Right, again, a regress problem. Frankfurt says there are third order volitions. Yeah? The third order volition V2 star here in this my example says that V1 may be my second order will, i.e. become effective in determining which of my first order volition should be my will. So this assesses V1 star as the right one, and V1 star chooses V2. Okay, so that's something, and there's also a discussion about the infinite hierarchies in Frankfurt style theories, but Frankfurt has his reply is, well, you know, actually, or in fact, for psychological reasons, the regress breaks down or collapses somewhere at the third level. I must admit I've never quite bought or understood his arguments for this. Now, meta-emotions and psychic unity. So, as I said in the introduction, why restrict psychic harmony, or the question of psychic harmony, to coherence within a hierarchy of higher order volitions? My thesis is that we also need certain constellations in the hierarchies of our emotions. Why? Well, because emotion. So first, our self at the first level self is not only constituted by volitions, but also by emotions, and also by other things, by beliefs, etc. I'll come to that in a minute. So there is not only self-appraisal in terms of higher order volitions, but there's also self-appraisal or disapproval or identification with oneself at the first level in terms of emotions, in terms of higher order emotions. For example, when you feel ashamed of your fears or of your joys or of your hopes, etc., this is or indicates disharmony in one's self. This is something that disturbs, as Frankfurt would say, your wholehearted identification with your first order self, because you have a negative higher order emotion that distances yourself from yourself, so to speak. In order to sketch this in Frankfurt style terminology. On the other hand, being happy or content with one's fears or joys or hopes, etc., or also with your moods, like being melancholic or feeling elated for no special reason, indicates at least prima facie harmony within oneself. That's the basic idea. Frankfurt also uses notions such as full satisfaction of a person with herself, wholehearted identification, that kind of thing, and I think that these psychic harmony or wholehearted self-endorsement, and endorsing yourself wholeheartedly seems to imply that you do not have there is some kind of harmony within the hierarchy of your emotions. Of course, if you are, not every negative meta-emotion indicates disharmony within yourself. For example, if you disapprove of your malicious joy that got hold of you at some point, you may, for moral reasons, sort of be satisfied or appreciate your disapproval of your malicious joy. Okay, if it goes away, if the effect is that you actually get rid of your malicious joy, then the process will end up in psychic harmony because of the disapproval. That's so here are complications that need to be accounted for. Yeah, so let's move on. A complication: negative meta-emotion need not indicate disharmony, feeling ashamed of one's malicious joy, where this fits one's moral attitudes. Now, does this account, I mean, these are just the bare outlines, but does this account oppose Frankfurt's theory of higher order volitions? I would not say, I wouldn't call it an opposing view. Rather, it amplifies the Frankfurt style account of higher order volitions. The account is neutral regarding different theories of emotion. This is another point. The account is neutral regarding different theories of emotions, except that it presupposes a theory that is broadly cognitivist in spirit and allows for emotions having intentional object. So you may ask, yeah, but what theory of emotions do you presuppose here? And the answer is, well, I think it works within, it's neutral regarding different theories of emotion, except that what I need is a broadly cognitivist theory of emotions that allows for emotions having intentional objects. Also, since according to most theories of emotions, desires or similar cognitive components are constitutive of emotions, my theory of meta-emotions incorporates Frankfurt's accounts of higher order volitions or desires, but it works with a more comprehensive account of the self. Here is another final idea which I haven't worked out and which is not in the paper, but I said that our first order self, the psychic mechanisms, episodes, and attitudes that constitute our first order self it will be a conglomerate of emotions, of beliefs, and of desires, say, just to restrict it to some basic kinds of psychic attitudes. Now, I want to reserve the term meta-emotion for, as I explained, for an emotion about one's first order emotions. But of course, we can also affectively or emotionally assess or appraise of our beliefs or of our desires. Okay, and just for terminological reasons, we might call higher order affects that are engaged with or are directed at first order beliefs or first order desires, higher order affects. Yeah, just for terminological reasons. I have no particular other reason to call the one thing meta-emotion and the other higher order affect. Well, although that meta-emotion somehow indicates that the first order object has to be an emotion. So an even more comprehensive picture would tell us more about higher order affects as well. It would incorporate a Frankfurt-style theory of higher order volitions it would have a theory of meta-emotions, but also of higher order affects, that is, of our emotional assessment or our emotional stance, let's put it that way, our emotional stance towards our first order beliefs and first order desires, broadly construed. Now we can, add here graded belief, credences, tripartite belief models, and all kinds of various kinds of these volitional attitudes, motives, desires, etc. Right, so this is the sketch of the account. So the tentative account of psychic unity would be something like this: call particular instances of meta-emotions and higher order affects instances of psychic harmony. For example, if S is happy or content with their desire, then S enjoys psychic harmony with respect to this desire D. And let's say, and this is again just a definition, just a suggestion for a definition, a person S enjoys psychic unity in a broader sense if and only if all relevant instances of S psychic attitudes and episodes enjoy psychic harmony. Thanks for your patience. I conclude with a quotation by Augustine: if some people, where he tries to rehabilitate emotions basically against the Stoics, if some people with a vanity all the more monstrous for being so rare take pride in not being stirred, encouraged, bent, or shaken by emotions, then they have lost more of their humanity than attained true tranquility. Thanks for listening.
Run the Q&A, but just as a note, so here's the thing, we don't have a mic with us, unfortunately. So if you could stand by the laptop and then go ahead and call on people with questions, and if you could repeat the question closer to at the laptop so that Christoph could hear the question, that would be great. Thank you so much. And then I don't know if you want to keep your presentation on, Christoph, just as an FYI, in case people want to look at some other slides or something like that.
Yeah, whatever you prefer. Yeah, probably some people will refer to some certain slides. So
let me see, because it would be nice if we could actually see your face a little bit more. So let's see if we could change the view a bit. I tried.
I think you got to stop sharing.
Speaker? Oh, really?
Just because if you're sharing, it's always going to show his screen.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Should
okay.
So.
We have the space for a little bit.
Yeah. So maybe stop sharing for now, and then we could, if you could just go back to his next start. Yeah. It is nice to actually kind of speak with you face to face.
Sure, absolutely. I thought you were looking, you had my face on the screen. Oh, okay. If not, no problem.
We did, but it's off to the side. So yeah, this is great. Okay, thank you.
All right, so far, do any students or faculty members have any questions for Christoph?
I got one.
All right, Brian.
What was the process like developing a study to try and observe meta emotions?
All right. What was the process of developing, what was it again? Meta emotions?
Study.
The study of meta emotions?
Facial expressions? Yeah, the facial expressions that the meta emotion writing.
The facial expressions and writing of meta emotions?
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. I left out the facial expression stuff because that was an empirical study. So this was actually a second part in my developing this theory, right? I had written with another colleague. When was this? I don't know. In 2003 or something. I don't know. There was an early paper on meta emotion with my co-author Anne Bartsch, where we explored the conceptual territory in some initial steps. And then I met this colleague of mine here in Innsbruck, and she worked in the Ekman-Friesen tradition of facial action coding theory, the FACS theory, the FACS, facial action coding system theory, and so. We met at a conference and got interested in one another's stuff, and then I had the idea. Now I was thinking, here is an established empirical method of talking about empirical tools. Here we have empirical tools that people are using in psychology for their theories of emotions. Somehow, could I apply this? Can this be matched with my ideas on meta emotion? So philosophical theories should be, are not empirical theories, but they should sort of not contradict empirical theories. And if it's very nice if empirical theories can be, if we can apply them to empirical theory. So the idea was, okay, but now here's a problem. If facial actions encode emotions, how would we get the second level into empirical research? How would we get a higher order emotion in your facial action? Why is it? How could I tell that this is not expressing your first order emotion or your second order emotion? And then the idea was this. This colleague of mine had endless tapes, footage of psychotherapy sessions, where people obviously talk 90% about their emotions, and she was a trained facial action decoder, and so I thought, if we find situations where people talk about a certain emotion, but their facial expression does not fit the emotion that obviously is the topic by now, okay? Then we have indications that the facial expression actually expresses a higher order appraisal of the first order emotion that currently is the topic of the psychotherapy talk, right? So this was the idea. And we sort of we kind of worked that out methodologically properly, and narrowed it down. So we looked for hours and hours, these endless tapes of psychotherapy sessions, found many sequences where people talk about their emotions. What we also had to sort out was, of course, when someone was talking about their fear and their facial expression was an expression of fear. Okay, then no, this was useless, because again, we couldn't tell whether the facial expression was expressing the first order or the second order emotion. But of course, then and there were the examples that worked best were actually negative emotions where people's faces expressed a different negative emotion, namely contempt, or as I call it, deprecation, or distance, and some kind of contempt, as it's called in emotion theory. So when the facial expression, according to facial action theory, encoded something like contempt, but the first order emotion was, for example, fear, then we concluded and argued for the fact that the person was actually showing contempt for their fear. This is a short story about it. I mean, it's more complicated, of course, methodologically, but that's basically what we did in this study. And then I said, oh, so here you go. Here we have an initial pilot study where we have some kind of empirical confirmation or empirical grounds for that confirms or supports our account of meta-emotions.
That sounds wonderful. Anyone else has a question?
My question was, what are some of your biggest limitations when it comes to meta emotions, and how do you plan on addressing them in the future?
All right. What are the biggest limitations for meta emotions, and how do you plan to address them in the future?
Limitate. What do you mean by limit? I mean, you mean theoretical limitations? Well,
it's a huge question. Do you want to narrow the scope of the question a little bit? Because it's like such a big question.
Yeah.
Just ask the first part, what are some limitations when it does come to meta emotions?
Like limitations with what respect? Like studying them?
Studying them.
Okay.
All right, the limitations of studying meta emotions.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. Right. Yeah. I mean, what the question always is of course I guess so. There's a methodological aspect to this and a conceptual aspect. Now, methodologically speaking, I don't know how far we get with conceptual analysis. I mean, one limitation is of course and I'm quite explicit about it. I say, well, this of course is developed within a certain tradition of theories of the self, right? But that's big. That's a big concept, the self. Okay, I broke it down in a kind of Humean way. You remember Hume said, I don't know what the self is, and I cannot what introspective awareness of oneself is, said Hume. He said, when I look into myself, I don't find the self. I don't find a self. What I do find introspectively is a certain psychic, certain mental episodes, certain mental events, certain mental psychic attitudes. Right? I find introspectively that I have certain desires right now, that I have certain beliefs, that I have certain emotions, etc. And this, I think, so of course, and there are philosophers who reject that whole tradition and say, yeah, I mean, this whole thing about introspectively being aware of oneself, breaking up the self into different kinds of psychic attitude or mental attitudes, that's kind of, that this is not the right model of the self. So this is one limitation. I say, yeah, all this, like Frankfurt, he's working broadly speaking, within this tradition. So I developed this model in this, broadly speaking, I should say, Humean tradition. This is a conceptual limitation. If that's wrong, or if you reject that whole tradition, you will not like this kind of meta emotion. Then, of course, there are other. You could also understand your question as asking: are there other ways of exploring psychologically, within psychology, meta emotions? I don't know. I mean, I could think of certain experiments where we test people's meta-emotional responses to certain stimuli. But I've never, and I once started working this out with a science colleague, but at that time it didn't manifest, didn't work out, the cooperation. So it worked out 2 times, but I mean, we'll have to see where the limitation is, how far we can get with this conceptual framework.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Anyone else? Yes, in the back.
I had a question. Toward the end of your lecture, you said that you have a cognitivist account of emotions that you're presenting here. Does that extend to first order emotions, or is the cognitive account just the fact that there are meta emotions? Like, is that the cognitive level of emotions, or is it, with your theory of meta emotions, one could have either a cognitivist or a non-cognitivist account of first order emotions?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah. I heard your question. Thank you. I think I like to adopt a cognitivist, broadly speaking, cognitivist account of emotions, but this does not exclude talk of non intentional affective phenomena. Right? I think a comprehensive cognitivist account of emotions has a theory of emotional intentionality. Yeah, says that emotions, consider appraisal theories, for example. Emotions tell us something about the world. Emotions are not just irrational, non-cognitive feelings, right? But rather they represent. They have contents that represent the world. This need not be propositional contents, but emotions represent the world and can be adequate and inadequate. We can evaluate them. We can assess them, and sometimes your anger at me will be adequate or will be appropriate, and sometimes not. That kind of thing. Now, when I say that the first level, I allow for non-intentional feelings such as moods, this doesn't mean that I adopt a pure feeling theory for the first level, but adopt a cognitivist theory for the higher order emotion. But rather, I think I'll need to adopt a cognitivist theory, which also, if it's comprehensive enough, will allow for non-intentional affective phenomena. I'm not sure whether this answers your question, but this is roughly what I would say here.
Yes, thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
I have a question. Thank you so much, Dr. Jäger, for the talk. It's a great example, I think, of where philosophers take complex phenomenon and try to categorize and simplify them for insight. But then, of course, you have to go back to the experience itself, and it becomes complicated. So my question is, it has to do with the theory of the self. And so much of how you presented the relationship between meta-emotions and emotions, or conflicting emotions, was on a hierarchical model. And so, for example, the problem of infinite regression of meta-emotions is a problem if it's a linear hierarchical model of how emotions relate within us, right? But I would like to question, and this is a bigger question, but I would like to question whether that hierarchical model, almost a bureaucratic model of how the mind operates, if that's adequate to what the experience of being human is like. And if a hierarchical sort of linear model of emotions, meta-emotions, or cognitions and metacognitions, and it's this whole tree of hierarchy, if that's the model, two things. One, it seems like our minds are organized like a corporation, with the CEO at top that provides unity for what the vice presidents are reporting, and the vice presidents are making decisions on what the middle management is reporting. So it seems like a very corporate structure. The other comment would be, is if we're so hierarchically organized, large language models in artificial intelligence will be able to mimic human beings, no problem, because that is a kind of linear decision tree model. So there's a lot I'm throwing at you, but I'm just wondering, is that accurate for me to say that the model of emotions and meta-emotions is based on a hierarchical model? And I think it's an alternative is some theories of the mind are based more on loops, right? There's circular models of how our thoughts and emotions relate to one another. They're not decision trees. They're like they're like neural networks of loops. So an emotion leads to a meta-emotion, but that meta-emotion might then inform the emotion again. So it's more like there are loops going on.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not I'm not at all opposed to this loop picture. I mean, I'm not saying that having the meta emotion does not affect the or cannot affect or whatever the lower level emotion. No, not at all. I think actually the use of the account of the theory for psychology, for psychotherapy, and people, psychotherapists have talked to me about this, is precisely the idea that our meta-emotional appraisal of our first level emotion does usually have the effect of in the long term, well, you know, sometimes maybe immediately, but can have and often does have the effect of altering our overall emotional profile. Okay, so I don't think that my account excludes this. On the what it does is rather taking a snapshot of a sort of a time slice where a person has an emotion of the first order and engages in higher order appraisal. Now, think for example of and I think support for this also comes from psychological appraisal theories, right? Appraisal theories say, yeah, an emotion arises when people appraise or evaluate, assess a given situation with respect to their goals or to their well-being. Okay, and very simply put, you know, if a situation is sort of fosters my goals or my ends or is in line with my ends, then I will have positive emotions. If it's against my aims, it will elicit negative emotions. But then, of course, the situations or the phenomena that will trigger this kind of emotion are also our own mental states and attitudes. And I think Frankfurt is right when he says that we ourselves can and do distance ourselves from certain desires we have, you know, as my example with and also from certain emotions. Yeah, you can feel the desire to have another piece of cake, but think, well, that's not, you know, I don't want to. What's the English word? Succeed to this desire, don't want to succumb to this desire. And so I think it's just a phenomenon. I think it's correct to say that we do evaluate, assess, or appraise our own mental attitudes and mental states. This does not mean that this is a kind of static picture or so, or that there are no loops So it's just the analysis just takes a snapshot of a certain time where this evaluation starts. Of course, but you're right. I mean, I haven't talked about emotional dynamics. That's quite correct. Maybe this is something. Yeah, maybe that's should be part of the project now that we have looked into the static or for analytical reasons analyzed a static occurrent self appraisal. What's the model of the emotional dynamics in terms of meta emotions? Yeah.
I'm not sure how we are on time, but I'm like dying to ask these questions. So in the literature on meta emotions, I think that there is not really ever a distinction that is made about whether or not a meta emotion needs to be about first order emotions that are occurrent, or if it's okay if they're not occurring, right? And it seems to me that this not addressing this question, right, might actually lead to some like problems with like how are we going to think about the infinite regress of meta emotions, right? Because if we require that meta emotions for them to be like, you know, first hand like subjective experiences of meta emotions, they have to be experiences where the first order emotions are also occurring, right? Then it seems that this would lead to a really not easy, but an easier way of addressing why we can't have an infinite regress of emotions, right? But it seems that often in the literature, right, people also accept. So I like how you make this distinction that we're not talking about the emotions we have of other people's emotions, right? Mm-hmm. But I think there's also this middle one where it's like my emotion, right? My fear about my my fear about my regret about my. You want me to use regret as my regret about my fear. How about this? Like my regret about my fear of speaking in public or something like that, right? But that fear of speaking in public is not something that I'm currently experiencing, right? Yeah. It's something that I just like have. I'm in a sense like it's a memory of the first order emotion, right? So like I feel like there's this distinction that needs to be made, right, between meta emotions that are emotions about occurrent first order emotions, right? And then meta emotions that are emotions about our first order emotions that are not necessarily occurring. And I want to say the real genuine meta emotions is like where the first order emotion is really also occurring. Yeah.
I did the last word, the last sentence I didn't get acoustically. The real question is what?
Oh, I wanna say like the side I want to come down on is like if we ask what the real meta emotions are, it's the ones where the first order emotions are also occurring.
Okay.
Like I feel like that's an argument that at least I would want to make in the discourse, right?
Right. This is an important distinction. But it is. I make it in my papers, and I incorporate it in the general definition, slide number 9, where I said, meta emotion is an occurrent or dispositional intentional state. That's an emotional state that is directed at another occurrent or dispositional affective state.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you regret, we can read your claim that you regret your fear. Yeah, speaking in public, for example. This has different readings according to the context. Yeah, you may regret your dispositional fear. You may regret that this is a character trait that you are habitually fearful of whatever, right? But also it may be that you are suffering from a current fit of fear, so to speak, and regret this occurrent emotion, that this disposition manifested itself in this occurrent emotion. Now, so I'm completely on the same page with you regarding these distinctions, right? I'm not so sure whether, why is it? I mean, why should it be the real, more important or more real, or that the real thing is the occurrent emotion being directed at an occurrent emotion? Yeah, I mean, you know, that's interesting and important, but maybe the work, the meta-emotional psychological work, self-therapeutical work, so to speak, is more important when it's directed at our disposition, emotional dispositions. You know, I must say I regret even more my disposition to get angry at times when I shouldn't, or something, right? Or not being able to control, for example, right, my anger. But this is a disposition, and it's worse to have this disposition sometimes, or dispositions that emotional dispositions which you disapprove of, and occurrent certain occurrent emotions. But there's, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think actually I would say it's both is important, or important in which respect? This is also the question, right? What is more significant in which respect, regarding psychotherapy, psychology, or what, right? But yeah, I completely agree that this is an important distinction, and I haven't emphasized it very much in this talk. But it's in papers. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience or no?
For time. Do you have time for one more question, Christoph?
Sure, yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Let me look at my list. I wrote a lot, that's why. Are meta emotions more cognitive or more emotional?
I wanted to be neutral regarding the specific theory of emotions that I choose, but I in my papers I adopt so-called multi-component theories, where I actually argue or endorse views which say that emotions, full-blown emotions, also has a feeling component, a phenomenal feeling component, at least in our current emotion. Of course, not the disposition. It doesn't feel to have a certain disposition, but in our current emotion has a feeling component, a desire component, a cognitive or belief component, which gives you the intentions, and a action guiding, a conative component, which it motivates you to act in certain ways. When you have fear, you want to flee the situation. When you're happy about something, you want to stay in the situation. This kind of thing. So I actually would incorporate the phenomenal feeling component in a full-blown occurrent emotion. I once gave this talk in St. Louis, or not this talk, but an early version of where I introduced. I think it was one of the first talks I gave about meta emotions many years ago, and John Greco, he commented that he said you don't need this. You don't need to settle on a specific theory of emotions, but it's more methodologically you're better off if you keep it neutral. If you say, and sometimes I now formulated this exactly in this way. I say I present it as a constraint for a good theory of emotions. Yeah, and actually this is, I could also we could argue that this account of meta emotions is a new argument against pure feeling theories, because a pure feeling theory in a Cartesian or Jungian mode cannot account for meta emotions, because when you have a pure feeling theory, you have no intentionality, right? So I could, on a general level, I could say, well, you know, whatever exact theory of emotions you want to adopt, it should be able to deal with meta emotions, and this excludes certain theories from the candidates. Yeah, that's my general answer here.
Yeah, no, it sounds good.
Yeah,
That's
I
all
think
for
we
today.
should wrap it up. Yeah, we don't want to hold Christoph too long.
I thank you for speaking to the students and faculty of North Park University. I understand you have a busy schedule, but thank you for taking your time out of your schedule just to speak with us and give us more insight into meta emotions.
Thanks so much. And if you have more ideas or examples, puzzling examples or examples from literature, please write me an email. I'm very happy. Thanks for these helpful questions that will inspire my thinking further about this stuff. Thank you very much indeed for having me.
No worries, thank you.